Hi everyone, thanks for coming along. Can everyone hear me at the back? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so this talk's going to be about specialist insurance and how data science kind of fits into that. So I'll just introduce myself quickly. My kind of background's underwriting really, and I've spent the last 5 years on the oil and gas team at QBE, and we insure oil platforms offshore and downstream operations onshore. And I've kind of got a keen interest in data science and analytics, and my background's really chemistry, but I kind of forgot that a long time ago. So what are we going to cover tonight? So we're going to start with an introduction to upstream energy insurance, and secondly we're going to talk about some principles for applying data science techniques within a specialist insurer. And my hope is that by the end of the talk you kind of have a bit of a flavour of what it is we do and how we operate, and also kind of get our take on how we think these techniques should be applied. So why should you care about specialist markets? So London's one of the key global, or it's the global hub of offshore and specialist insurance products. And there's over $70 billion of premium, which is in the London market. QBE right around $4.4 billion within Europe, so it's a big part of QBE globally. And it's a field that's kind of untouched by data scientists. It's pretty even at this kind of what a lot of industries would consider a pretty mature stage of analytics maybe. There's still a lot of opportunity within specialist insurers, and it's QBE's ambition to realise an additional $100 million of profit through data science over the next 5 years. So we've got some quite ambitious targets, and we might discuss a little bit about how we're going to get there at the end. So a quick history lesson before I start. So to cast your mind back, well, not your mind, but think about the 17th century. A key part of the economy at that time was international trade, and people would move goods and cargoes around the world using boats like this. And this was a time of where you could have a lot of these vessels would be lost at sea, or there would be pirates and things like that, and a lot of vessels would be lost. So entrepreneurs in London saw an opportunity there. They realised that if they charged the ship owners some money up front and then promised to reimburse them in the event that they lost a vessel, they could kind of look after the ship owners and make themselves a tidy profit at the same time. And Lloyd's was really the place to go to kind of buy this kind of service. And so why did people come to Lloyd's, and what was Lloyd's? So Lloyd's was a coffee shop at the time. So there's not an immediately obvious reason why that would become the centre of marine insurance and the world's specialist markets today. But what they did provide was data, actually. So you could get shipping information at Lloyd's, and you could find out whether or not a cargo had reached its destination or not, which was valuable back then, which kind of goes to show that data in the insurance industry is not a new thing. Okay, so on to upstream energy. So what is upstream energy? So upstream is basically getting oil and gas out of the ground. And there's quite a nice definition from Wikipedia, but I won't read it. So if we were to kind of look at QBE's kind of core client base within the upstream sector, you could kind of cluster it. If you were to set some sort of algorithm on it, you could kind of cluster it into two types of company. It's basically exploration and production companies. So these are your Totals, Chevrons, ExxonMobils of the world, and national oil companies and such like. And their business model is really like they own shares in the field, and they're going to sell the oil and gas into market to make money. And then the second kind of broad class of client that we have is contractors. So these are people who provide specialist services. So things like there'll be specialists in drilling wells. This will be Transocean and Seadrill and companies like that. Oops, I nearly killed it. And principally they're going to make money by charging like a day rate. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So where does offshore exploration start? So it starts with something like a seismic survey, and the aim of a seismic survey is essentially to narrow down your odds of finding oil. So rather than just drilling holes in the ground, they'll take a boat like the one shown here, and they'll produce a shock wave which goes down into the ground, and it will bounce off the rocks, and and the waves as they bounce back up are collected by these hydrophones. And the engineers at the oil companies can interpret all that data, and they can crunch it, and they can produce 3D and 2-dimensional maps. And like the one on the right here, so you can see that these are the wells. This is the well plan superimposed over the top, and you can see they're trying to target these areas where there's little peaks. This is where they think there might be oil trapped within that layer. So once you've kind of got your seismic survey out the way, and you're trying to, you've got some prospects, your next step is to drill what we call an exploration well. And broadly speaking, drilling offshore has sort of similar foundations and principles to drilling onshore. So the main difference obviously is that you've got the water over the top. So you've got some key components, and we'll just work from top to bottom. So you've got your mobile offshore drilling unit at the top, and then you're going to have a riser which goes down to the seafloor, at which point you're going to have this piece of equipment called a blowout preventer. And what that's essentially there to do is, in the event that you lose control of the well and hydrocarbons come back up, you can close in the blowout preventer and then push drilling mud down into the well, and that can kill the flow of oil and gas from the well. So this is a safety mechanism really, and the kind of like what it will try and do is close around the drill pipe shown here, and if that doesn't work, it will actually try and cut through it. So to give you an idea of what kind of depths we're talking about, this can be anything from a few feet of water in somewhere like the Gulf of Mexico area, what we call Area 2 wet, which is kind of inland lakes. So that can be a few feet all the way down to 12,000 feet. And these wells, they'll typically be around 10,000 feet drilled into the ground, but that can be as much as 25,000 feet. So what are they doing at the bottom of that well? So there's a drill bit, and essentially there's drilling mud, which is, sorry, I'll start at the bottom. So we've got some teeth here, and these are cutting into the rock, and then we've got some what we call drilling mud, which is essentially a mix of heavy clay and other minerals. And the purpose of this is it pumped down to the bottom, and then it lifts the cuttings out of the well, which cools and lubricates the drill bit, and it also equalizes the pressure from the outside reservoir, so it's stopping the well caving in on itself essentially. And to drill your well, you've essentially got, it's kind of a 3-step process. So you're going to drill a little way down, and then you're going to add a casing, which is essentially a tube to carry your oil and gas back up, and then you have to cement the gap between the casing and the side of the well. So you drill down a little way, and then you cement, and then you drill a little bit more, and then you add your casing, then you cement, and you keep doing this process until you reach the desired target depth. And you'll know when you've reached the right depth because you'll be continually analysing the drilling mud, which is carrying those cuttings out of the bottom of the well. You'll analyse that on board the platform and look for traces of hydrocarbons. So hopefully by this stage you haven't had any problems, and you start to think about completing the well. So what you've really got at this stage is a really long tube down to the bottom. So you need to punch some holes in the bottom of the tube, and that's going to let the hydrocarbons in. So they use basically high explosives to punch some holes in the bottom of the well casing, and that's how you drill an oil well. So these are the kind of operations that we're ensuring when we're talking about contractors. So it's these drilling operations, and we're providing coverages like contingent operators, extra expense, and we're also covering the physical damage element of the risk as well. So that's the value of the vessel. So there's kind of three broad classes of mobile offshore drilling unit. The first kind is what we call a jack-up rig. And it's called a jack-up rig because these legs actually jack up and down. So to be clear, all of these units are like fully mobile. They can be deployed in different locations. And these legs can be up to 450 feet. So you basically move it on location and then you lower down the legs, and it's like a three-legged table. You just push down until you've got your stable platform, and then the platform rises out of the water to give you a bit of a gap between the waves and the bottom of the platform, and that's going to provide you your platform to drill off of. So that can operate in water depths up to 450 feet, and typically you're going to be paying around $100,000 a day for one of these units. So as you'll find in offshore energy, everything's expensive. So moving on, we have the semi-subs. So this is a bit of a different league. So this is where you're going to start to look at much deeper water depths. So that you can go down to about 10,000 feet. And the cost of these units is going to be a lot more expensive. So and then the final, so these are called semi-subs because they're partly submerged under the water. And then the final kind, you've got these ship-shaped vessels, which are called drill ships. And they've basically got a central drilling derrick in the middle. And there's actually a hole in the bottom of the vessel called the moon pool, which is shown here. And then typically they're gonna operate in similar kinds of conditions to the semi-submersibles, but again, these can drill in deeper water depths again. And yeah, that's all I've got to say on that. Okay, so let's have a think about what kind of products we might give to a drilling contractor. So typically, a good place to start is to think about what their worst case incident might look like. So this is the Deepwater Horizon, which you've probably seen before in the news a few years ago, or maybe in a Mark Wahlberg film a bit more recently. And what happened there was they had a blowout, so they had a loss of well containment, and the blowout preventer failed, and they ended up destroying the platform. So typically here, the kinds of losses that a drilling contractor might incur are physical damage claims, so for the hull and machinery and removal of wreck elements, and then legal liabilities, and finally loss of hire, and we provide coverage for all of these, and typically we'll bundle these into what we call package policy, and we'll provide that all in one go. So let's take a look at some E&P companies. So once the contractor's been out in the field and they've kind of established that there's some oil there, you start building a sort of a business case to exploit the field. And one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to build a plan to construct the infrastructure that's going to bring all of that oil and gas to market. And what we provide here is construction cover. So construction projects typically, they can be up to 10 years, but typically 3 or 4 years maybe. And the principal risk here is that you're building up your unit. You take it to, you think, oh great, I'm almost done. I'm just going to lower these top sides onto the jacket here, and then your crane fails, and then you drop the top sides into the sea. So obviously that's got some consequences. So first of all, you've got all the loss of value from the top sides, and secondly, your project's now going to be delayed. So you can purchase delay in startup insurance, and you've also got construction liability cover in the event that if it falls on somebody else's equipment. The unit on the left here is I've added that because I want to illustrate that we kind of insure a lot of new technologies and new risks. So this is the Shell Prelude, and it's a floating FLNG vessel, and it basically can take liquefied natural gas straight out of the sea, process it, and load it onto an LNG carrier. So it never has to come come on shore. It's going to be stationed in the Australian Northwest Shelf, and it's the largest floating installation ever built. So it's over 500 meters long, which is it's as long as the Petronas Towers are tall. So to give you an idea, it's absolutely huge, and it weighs over 600,000 tons. So moving on to the operational phase, the kind of installation that you've built during your construction phase is going to be largely dependent on like the economics of the field and the characteristics of the field that you're trying to exploit. So you might find yourself with a fixed jacket platform, like the one on the far right here, or a floating production and offloading vessel, it's FPSO, and then you've got semi-submersibles, spars, and TLPs, and compliant towers as well. So, and also you could have like subsea systems. So there's a real mixture of different assets that can be insured at this point. But they all have a few elements in common. So again, we've got this, the key risk is going to be something like fire and explosion, really. So you can have physical damage resulting from those sort of perils. And then what might be like a real disastrous loss would be something like an OE loss on top of that, where you've lost control of the well, and that subsequently damages the platform. You can also buy cover for loss of production income, which is basically insuring you for the money that you would have made had it not been for the loss. And again, energy liabilities. What's quite interesting is that you might find as a risk manager that your package policy excludes windstorm insurance within the Gulf of Mexico. So you'll have to go back out into the market to go and buy additional cover to protect yourself from a hurricane or something like that. This complex at the bottom, I've included it because it's got a bit of an interesting story to it. This is the Ecofis complex, and you can see that there's lots of bridges linking it together, and that's not really uncommon offshore. So each one of these facilities will be compartmentalised and have a slightly different purpose. And you can actually see in the centre, if you're not too far back, that there's a wall that goes around this central platform, and that's to stop the platform from flooding. And essentially, this platform has sunk over time as they've exploited the reservoir, and now they've had to build a wall around it to protect it. So these have been out in the North Sea for over 30 years now. The final step in the life of a field is the decommissioning phase, and once again, the insurers are there with a product. So this is the YME platform in the North Sea, I believe, and this unit here is called the Pioneering Spirit, and this is the largest boat ever built. So it was built quite recently, and it's basically two super tankers bolted together with a deck over the top. And what it's essentially doing is it's coming along and it cuts the legs off of the platform, and they can then be carried away to be scrapped. So this is going to find quite a lot of work in the North Sea and places like that, where you've got a lot of aging infrastructure that's coming to the end of its economic life. And again, you can kind of imagine that you might drop this or damage the unit in some way, and that's the kind of cover we're providing. So just a little bit about the profile of the risks that we insure. Typically our deductibles are set pretty high, so they're over $1 million, so there's not too many slips and trips kind of claims. So we suffer from what you call low frequency, high severity incidents, and a good way of modelling this is what we call the Swiss cheese model. So it basically says that for a hazard to result in a loss, a number of things have to happen. So it's not just going to be like one point of failure. It needs to be a number of different failures in the system. So a good example of this is the Mumbai High North tragedy. So this was offshore India in 2005 in the Arabian Sea, and they essentially have a complex here. This is the Mumbai High North complex, and then they had a support vessel which was stationed alongside. So it was during the monsoon season, and the seas were quite rough and it was quite windy, and one of the chefs on board the support vessel managed to cut the ends of his fingers off, I think potentially in a blender. And they had some divers in the sea at the time as well, so they had to pull up the divers into the diving bell, which was so they could so they wouldn't decompress too quickly. And then they wanted to get this guy to safety. They couldn't launch a helicopter from the support vessel because the seas were too rough. So they decided that they would use the crane on the back to move him onto the platform. Unfortunately, the crane on the side they should have approached on wasn't operational, so they decided to approach around the opposite side. At which point they managed to get him on board the platform, and then as they were doing that, they had some sort of thruster failure, which meant that they actually ended up crashing into the gas risers of the platform, which unfortunately destroyed the platform, and it killed 22 people. So it was a real tragedy that started from a rather bizarre beginning, and essentially we had like multiple points of failure really. So we had we had the unusual weather conditions which kind of brought about the incident in the first place. I say unusual, they had these high seas, and then the crane failure, the fact that the thrusters on the support vessel weren't working properly, and then again that they hadn't protected the gas risers properly from impact from the vessel, and also that there was no regulator at that point offshore India. So that was something that they I think the US helped them with afterwards. Okay, so some quick highlights of the oil and gas sector. So we ensure as we've kind of mentioned, we ensure the full life cycle of the asset. We have these unusual low frequency, high severity claims. The kinds of clients we're working with are typically very sophisticated. You're meeting with risk managers who have often got engineering backgrounds and CFOs of the multinational oil companies. And they typically purchase complex products and policies. In fact, going back to the sophistication point, some of the oil companies spend so much on insurance that they actually decided to make their own insurance companies. So they've got captive insurers, and they'll pass exposure out to the captive first, who will retain a portion of the risk, and before passing it on to the commercial market. And then just to give a quick highlight of QBE, so we're one of the largest providers of oil and gas cover, and we've got capacity of up to $500 million, which means that we can, on any one oil platform in the world, we can have $500 million at risk at any one time. So if it blows up, then we can have some pretty big losses. We're one of the leading markets in the world, so typically this is what we'd call syndicated business, which means that essentially you're insuring a unit that's worth $3.5 billion, and most insurers haven't really got the balance sheets to write all of that. So we'll kind of divide the risk into portions, and we'll take, say, 10%, and somebody else will take a little bit more or a little bit less. And you'll essentially find that certain markets on the slip are lead markets, like QBE are, and then you'll have what's called a following market, who are kind of just writing smaller lines and following the pricing of the leaders. We offer worldwide cover, and our teams are kind of spread across London, Singapore, and Houston. Okay, so data science in specialist insurance. So I guess data science you've probably got two ways of looking at data science. So you could either look at it as a bit of a skill set, or you can look at it as kind of like a group of technologies. And regardless of how you look at it, like an insurer's initial challenge is really building an understanding of these available technologies and skill sets. And then your second port of call is to kind of identify how to best apply these technologies and skills in practice. And I think it's really important not to put the technology first. So we don't want to be starting out saying, I'm going to implement XGBoost, where am I going to use it? So what is important is that you look for a problem in the business and then try and build a solution around that to avoid these kind of cart before horse situations and square peg, round hole solutions. So when you kind of frame the argument like that, you're not really talking about data science per se. What you're really talking about is profitable innovations which meet the needs of clients. And that can be someone internal or external. So that could be a Chevron or a Statoil who want a new product, or that could be like one of your manager in the office, or a claims professional or an actuary. So rather than focusing on the technologies, instead that turns our attention to the teams and the culture and the infrastructure, and then developing these solutions to meet the client's needs. So my kind of take-home message to you all is where there are business needs, there are data science opportunities. And I want to give you a couple of examples of things we've been working on and things we've done in the past, where we've kind of tried to answer a business solution, and then we've kind of crafted something using data science tools. So this was this is a project we're working on at the moment. So we want to build a model which can assist underwriters with risk selection, and this is a model we're building for British Marine's P&I book. And so just give a quick overview of P&I. So P&I is essentially coverage for a variety of different things, but it includes collision and penalties and fines and pollution costs that a ship owner might incur. So the kind of real benefit, the real kind of challenges here or opportunity was that there was lots of granular data, but the question is like how do we make best use of it? We've got lots of policy information and lots of claims data. So our solution was to use machine learning techniques to provide a predictive claims model. So essentially what we'd like to do is develop so the way we kind of broke this down was we said, right, okay, if we had some metrics that we could classify risks as good or bad, predicted claims, predicted premium, predicted claims versus premium, and predicted loss ratio, we'd be able to kind of classify risks as better or worse, and that would be useful to underwriters. So we know the premium, but we need to be able to predict the claims, and that kind of lends itself to some sort of regression algorithm where we're looking to predict these claim amounts. So we've kind of split the problem out into two parts, tried to build a model to predict claims frequency and then a model to predict claims severity. And then if we kind of combine the two, we can try and predict claims and fill in the blanks in these metrics. Second example, so this is a question I got probably about 18 months ago from one of the offshore energy portfolio managers, and he said to me, can we better understand our offshore energy losses arising from Gulf of Mexico windstorm? So this is like a specific line of business that we do quite a lot of, offshore windstorm insurance. And the real challenge here is actually a lack of historic claims data. So we haven't really had a big windstorm incident since hurricanes Ike. Before that it was Rita and Katrina, and they're the real losses that kind of shaped the market really. And since then it's been pretty quiet. So you could look at the last, say, 10 years on the offshore book and it would look pretty incredible. But that's ignoring the fact that we haven't really seen anything that's really caused us any problems in that time. So the problem is that we've got this lack of historic claims information. But what we do have is we have exposure information, and we have policy information, and we have underwriter expertise. We've got public databases of historic windstorm data, and we've also got engineering information and expertise as well. So these sort of problems kind of lend themselves to some sort of simulation. And that's exactly what we tried to do. So we built a Python-based Monte Carlo simulation for windstorm, and we essentially started breaking the problem down. So I came up with this recipe for simulating these losses, which is basically to understand the frequency distribution of Gulf of Mexico hurricanes, what the severity distribution is in terms of wind speeds. And then what we basically got to do is start to look at the paths taken by the storm, which is all available in these public data sets, and then which assets are in the path. So you need some sort of algorithm to identify which platforms have been run over, and then you can start to apply some engineering assumptions. You can start to apply damage factors to your exposures that are in those paths and calculate what your likely losses are going to be. So that can be really useful for a variety of purposes. It's going to give underwriters a rough idea what their average annual losses are going to be, and that way you can kind of you can kind of compare that to the premium you're getting, rather than me standing there and saying, oh, you've had no losses for the last 10 years, off you go. I can kind of say, well, you might not have had any losses, but based on the model, that's possibly not, that's not maybe a good way to think about this. It's not particularly unlikely that that would have occurred. And the final example we've got as a business case. So we talked a little bit about loss of production income earlier. So let's suppose that you own a platform out in the Gulf of Mexico, and you want to insure it you want to buy some loss of production income. Now this is the pipeline network for the Gulf of Mexico, and let's pick a spot. So let's say you've got a platform around here, and your production runs over to this platform and then onto shore. Well, guess what? This other guy over here, he also wants some business interruption cover, and his platform also connects up to the same platform that yours does. So you essentially get these hubs. This is a concept called preferential attachment if you're into kind of networks and stuff. And essentially the oil companies are trying to minimize the amount of pipe that they have to lay. They don't want to lay a separate pipeline for every single platform out there. They want to kind of tie it back into key hubs. And that's a problem for insurers, because it means that you have to understand where these key hubs are. So a good technology for that is a graph database. So something like Neo4j, where you can kind of load your data in there, query the database, and then build an instant picture of what's connected to what. And you can also kind of like leverage some of the algorithms that are built into Neo4j by finding the shortest paths to shore and such like, which are going to help you identify where these hub locations are as well. So this is a really useful tool for underwriters who are trying to understand their contingent business interruption risk. And essentially, it means that we can do our best to avoid taking on more than $500 million of risk, which might get a bit scary. So in conclusion, we're kind of what I've covered so far, that's by no means the only opportunities out there. There's a really broad range of opportunities. I've kind of tried to highlight a few on the right here, and you can take your time to read that at another time maybe. But I mean, essentially all these ideas are driven by data, be it internal, external, or data you're getting from your clients, and then applying analytics and generating understanding, which is going to help us drive through improvements in these areas. So I'm just going to kind of close off by talking about some business challenges. So I think the initial challenge or opportunity, depending on how you see it, is a bit of a cultural one. And it's kind of embedding a startup mentality in insurers and trying to make it so that we're a little bit leaner and a bit more, I'm going to use the word agile, but just making sure that we can deliver on the projects that we're setting out to do. And so that's the initial challenge. And then also a second piece is around the pace of external change. So whilst at some point, my example earlier was when I was talking to a few people was driverless cars, and there could be a certain point where we can build pretty much the perfect algorithm for pricing car insurance. And it's not going to matter particularly, because at the end of the day, cars are going to have a better algorithm, which is going to actually avoid accidents occurring in the first place. And for insurers, when you take away risk, that is what we are trading at the end of the day. So we're going to see a lot of changes in a lot of markets as the technology transforms these industries. And the second thing is things like Internet of Things, where we're going to see over the next probably 5 to 10 years, I'd imagine, data coming in from a lot of different sources. And I don't think that's something that insurers are particularly prepared for yet. The final step, the final kind of business challenge is building a team.